Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, all of you, my lovely friends and listeners and the audience tuning in and being here. I'm live with you here on the Aswa Radio Network, Ivana Psychic Radio and Moonstrike TV. And I'm just extending my very, very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm your host, Zsuzsanna Hörcsög. I'm a medium and I'm coming to you live from the UK, from the Midlands. And this is our show, Zsuzsanna Medium. And then if you have been listening and tuning in week after week on Tuesdays when I'm here, you know very well how much I enjoy being here, talking to you, bringing you guests, bringing you interviews, talking about all various wonderful spiritual and mystical things. And today I've got another wonderful guest lining up for you here. So stay tuned in and listen. What is going to make magic? How can we make magic in our lives, especially as we enter this wonderful time of solstice, winter solstice here today? So our guest today is the wonderful Emma Catherine. So Emma, how are you?
I am so good. Thank you so much for having me, Zsuzsanna. I can't wait to just chat to you about all kinds of stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. And I tell you what, I tell the audience that the idea of you being here came today when you sent me a wonderful winter solstice message and blessings. And I just thought, I know that your book was coming out, one of your books, the latest was coming out. And I know that you are really into all the witchery, but I think it's more than just witchery and magic. So, we just created this show here. So, every time when I have a guest here, my first thought, my first notion goes, how did you get into everything what you are doing or what you are being, Emma?
Oh, wow. I suppose, I've always been a weird kid in that when my sisters were playing with their Barbie dolls, I had like my head stuck in a book or, all of that kind of stuff. So I guess I've always been a little bit different. And for a long time, I didn't know that what I felt and what I believed and all of those things. I didn't know they had a name or that other people felt this way. And so I kind of stumbled into witchcraft and magic. As a teenager, as many people do. But back in the day before the internet and, we just had our little local library to rely on. And so you go to your library and you find, all of these wonderful books that you never realized existed. And yeah, it's a bit like going into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, so probably like you start somewhere and then you end up somewhere, and it's probably like the process or, what you were into. So what was really drawing you in? So what was the first thing you really captured your imagination, not just your mind, but your imagination?
Yeah. I suppose, so like the first books that we found, and I have nothing against Wicca or Wiccans at all, but, that was what was accessible at the time. So all of the books that were in the library and all of the things that I kind of looked into were very Wiccan-esque at first, because I thought that was all there was. And so, I spent a long time really learning about that. And then it's just one of those things. I've always been a book nerd anyway. I've loved learning. I love reading. I'm just a massive old nerd. And so, it was just kind of one thing led to another. You'd read a book and it'd give you some ideas about the next thing. And it just drew me in. And I guess what I really liked about everything, whatever you want to call it, whatever traditional path, I guess I just liked that it was very much in tune with nature. It was very, it was just all of those things that I've been feeling for a long time, but hadn't been able to voice or kind of put a name to because I didn't know those things existed. And so, as I was reading, as I was learning and exploring, there was just millions of those little light bulb moments, and it kind of went from there.
Yes, it's very beautiful. It's interesting you said the nature, because I would imagine, or I imagine, well, that is how the experience is, as if going into a forest, and then the trees are there, and then the animals are there and hiding, and the birds, and then everything is there, plants. But then once we put the focus on something, things become alive. And then I feel that when we are on this journey, whichever way we approach it, when we put the focus there, it's somehow really talking to us and inviting us. So, your experience, because you said you felt as a child that, oh, I was a little bit odd or different from the others. Was there somebody in the family you could check your findings, checking in or talk to, or it was really you who was creating that experience for yourself?
Um, well, actually, I've got a really good story to tell. But before I get to that story, so my mum was like really quite good. My mum is kind of, I guess she might call herself a hippie. So our household was quite open-minded growing up. So my Jamaican side of the family, my grandma, my paternal grandma, was quite religious, into Christianity, which, there's nothing at all wrong with that. But it wasn't kind of forced onto us or anything. So my home was quite an open-minded home. And so one of the first witchcraft books that I had, and I can't remember the author, but I can remember my mum giving it to me. And I think it was called something like Where to Park Your Broomstick or something like that. It was aimed at like teenagers, and so that was, I had an open upbringing, which was really quite beneficial, and you don't realise that until you kind of look back on those instances. But a few years ago, when I was talking to my mum's mum, so my maternal grandmother, she was telling me that back in the 70s, her and her sister were Wiccan. And it was really interesting because we didn't know that before. And I was telling her about some of my writings and, generally talking about it. And that's when she kind of said her and her sister used to be Wiccan back in the 70s. So that was really quite interesting.
Yes, it's quite fascinating. I would imagine, just finding out that actually it's not just you, but then the others, and then from that space, it's an open discussion, and you can talk about all your findings. So I know that your latest book, because we can talk about so many things here. I know your latest book is Witch Life, and then the magical moment, and how we can create magic in our everyday life. So what is magic, Emma, in your world? What is magic?
What is magic? It's that question, isn't it? For me, and a lot of people, when you tell them that you do witchcraft or that you believe in magic and that kind of thing, I guess you get the usual responses, because a lot of people, the first introduction to witchcraft or magic is through kind of films and cinema and fiction and all of that kind of thing. So it can be a bit of a shock when people actually realise that there are people who do witchcraft and magic. For me, it can be as simple as, a seed growing. When we think about it, and we think about those things in very mundane terms. So you have a seed and you put it in the soil, and we can explain the processes that enable that seed to grow. But when you actually think of it, that animating spark, it's pure magic, is it not? So, what is magic? It is anything and everything. It's from that very smallest moment of life right through to, everything and anything. What we create with our minds is magic. I'm a little bit of a hermeticist at heart. And so for me, if we think about our mundane world and everything in it, everything that is man-made, everything that we can see, touch, feel, that has been created by humans, it's all started in somebody's mind as an idea, as a little grain. And so, so what is magic? It is all of those things and everything in between.
I tell you what, I really love the way, how you are explaining, and especially when you said that when it is in the mind, anything which is in the mind is magic. And then it's really, I think it's really good we have this conversation, because we could well, we could look at it, or people can look at it that, yes, I'm lacking magic in my life. So I have to search for it. And I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be satisfied when I find the magic. And then I'm tending I'm spending my life on looking for that magic. And when I'm not finding the magic, then my life is not a happy one. And then I think, especially this time of the year, Christmas is coming up, people might be a little bit overwhelmed by all the preparations and everything. And we just need to have that moment of knowing. First of all, I think, having that awareness and knowing that magic is actually everywhere. I just need to find. I don't even have to look for it because it's so much around me immediately. And it's either I'm looking at it the outside world, or within myself, then it is always there. And in that sense, life is quite profoundly beautiful. So what would you give would you have some tips for people who are still at the stage of, actually, yes, I am looking for the magic, and when things don't go my way, then I'm a little bit disappointed. So any tips or any ideas you can give to people?
Yes. And, it's something I talk about a lot in my latest book. Just a little shameless plug right there. Bring
it a little bit closer so we can have a look at it, please. So it's called Witch Life.
Yeah, Witch Life. A practical guide to making everyday magical. And that's really what I wanted to show to people, is that, yes, there are these big joyous moments. So within witchcraft, a lot of witches follow what we call the Wheel of the Year, which breaks down the seasons into Sabbats. And I kind of view the Sabbats as being kind of markers of the season rather than standalone days. So today is the winter solstice, or Yule. And so we can find magic in all of those big moments, absolutely. But it's also there in the very small things that we do. And so one of the biggest blocks that people face in their day-to-day life and making time for anything really is actually time, making that time. We all lead increasingly busy lives. We have work, we have the pressures of family and spending time with the family and all of those little bits and pieces that we do, all of the chores we have to do. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to fit in any time for ourselves. And then when we do, we often feel guilty because, it's not productive time. And so the easiest thing that people can do to help make their lives more magical is just to give themselves 10 minutes a day. And I start with 10 minutes a day because I think that is accessible. Everybody can fit in 10 minutes, whether that's setting your alarm 10 minutes earlier in the morning, turning off your TV for 10 minutes. Making that time is the biggest way that we can add more magic into our lives, because then it gives us the space to kind of figure out what we want to do, to experiment, because experimenting is, I think it's the fun part of magic and witchcraft, because I have the book and I would love people to go out and read the book. But what I would really love is that people read the book and then try what's in there, but then adapt it to suit their own lifestyles, what's around them, So in that 10 minutes, it might be you take your morning cup of tea or coffee outside and watch the sunrise, or listen to the bird song, or just stand with your feet in the grass for 10 minutes, which is much nicer to do in summer, I might add.
Yeah.
But it's just those little things of making time. I think once you kind of give yourself that space, and once you get into the habit of giving yourself that 10 minutes, which you will increase, by the way, because why wouldn't you? But once you get into the habit of just setting that time aside, that's when you can really just relax into it and kind of take the time to figure out what is it you want to do, because the wonderful thing about magic and witchcraft is that there are many different paths.
Yes. So, what I'm hearing in your voice is how I'm reclaiming myself.
Absolutely.
So say a little bit more about reclaiming myself and so on.
So people who might be familiar with my work for places such as Gods and Radicals will know that I have a couple of books out called Reclaiming Ourselves and Reclaiming Food. And the reclaiming, you know, it can look like many different things to many different people. We've spoken a little bit just now about reclaiming some of our time for ourselves, because time is a precious commodity that we are, you know, that we have so many constraints on our time that it is an act of resistance, it is an act of reclaiming just to take some of that time back for ourselves, you know. But it's just really about living a little bit more freely, whether that's in the confines of what's going on in the world right now, just in our own everyday lives. There's many different ways we can break it down. And so I talk a lot about reclaiming things such as food. So that includes learning to cook from scratch. For me, as an animist, you know, I see the whole of the natural world as being imbued with spirit, as being alive with spirit. And so, you know, I enjoy going foraging, and mushroom season is just coming to a close in the UK. But I really enjoy all of that and all of those little ways. So it's a way of reclaiming our food security and going back to that. I guess we would call it folklore, and folk stories and all of those kind of forgotten bits of knowledge that we've kind of lost a little bit, you know. And for me, all of that feeds into reclaiming ourselves, reclaiming our connection with the land and to nature, to one another as well. You know, it all feeds in. It's so, I could talk about it like all night.
You know, I love it. You know, when we start talking about plants and foraging and being out in nature, and I always find, I don't know too much about mushrooms and the word, you know, a little bit of the foraging I started looking into this year. In fact, while I'm talking to you over there in the corner, I've got a big pile of books I lashed myself on, so that I'm quite devoted. I'm quite adamant that I'm going to learn more for the next season, really, about foraging. But then I'm really present to that when I'm out in nature, I need to bow my head, because yes, I can ask nature whether I can take certain things, whether it is out in nature or in my garden, but I need to be humble that it is there. And then I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversation when you said that the seed, the magic, there is a magic in the seed in that very, very moment. So do nature whisper to you things?
I think so. You know, when there's just, for me as well, like I feel like most people I speak to has like a special place, you know. So for some people it's in hills and mountains, for others it's by the ocean. For me, it's in the woods, you know. When I'm in the woods, that is the place where I perhaps feel most connected to spirit. You know, and when I talk about spirit, lots of people call it lots of different things. Some people might call it God, some people might just call it spirit, but it's that feeling of being connected to something greater than ourselves, whatever you want to call it, you know. And for me, that is when I'm in the woods. So foraging, really, you know, if I go out foraging and I don't get anything, it's not a wasted trip. I come home and I feel just as exhilarated and just lighter than I would if I came home with lots of goodies to cook as well. So the actual act of collecting the food is kind of just a happy coincidence or a happy consequence of just being out in nature. For me, it is that feeling of being out in nature. And it doesn't matter, you know, I could have had the worst week at work. I work in an autistic school, and you know that presents its own challenges. It can be quite challenging at times, and so if I'm feeling quite stressed about anything, just coming home, going for a walk in the woods, just makes you feel so much better. It really is medicine for the soul.
Absolutely, absolutely, and your words really resonate because sometimes we just have to take that time, you know, that's 10 minutes or any time what we have, just walking out and being out in nature and being with the elements, and whether we are looking for something, and actually, you know, without the need of looking for something, because once we find something, if you take it that that's a present from nature, and then it was just there for us in the very moment when we passed that stretch or anything. I remember a few years ago when I lived in a town when we had a very, very huge forest next to us. So I really enjoyed walking outside bare feet in the forest. And then I remember I had to take my steps very, very carefully. And then that really allowed me to be very much in the present moment. And that was the time when deers just from nowhere appeared. And, when you actually stop breathing because the moment is just so very beautiful, or it's so very beautiful when you look at a little flower, or when you notice anything, or the changes of seasons, or the buds on the trees. And then that is so very magical. And then I think it's so important that we spend more time, really as much time as possible, being outside and using those elements. And then I feel that in that sense, or the witchery, whatever we want to call it, it is being part of it. It really means that being part of nature and being nature itself, ourselves.
Absolutely, because I think we forget in our modern age, and it's quite easy to do, we forget that actually we're not separate from nature. We are a part of it, we couldn't exist without nature. And again, we kind of forget that in our modern worlds, and because we are creatures of comfort, are as humans, and so we do like to come home to our nice cozy houses and all of that, but actually we are a part of nature. And one of the things that comes up quite a lot, and when I'm speaking to people, because I'm quite lucky, so I live in a small kind of rural town in the Midlands in the UK, and I can leave my house now, and in 5 or 10 minutes I can be at a woods, or I can be at the river, so I'm very lucky in that I have a lot of nature around where I live. But for people who live in inner city areas perhaps, or more urbanized towns, I kind of think we've become a little bit, I don't know, we kind of romanticize nature, I guess. And the pagan and witchcraft community is no different to any others. And so, we romanticize nature because we forget we're a part of it. And actually, we are a part of it. And, you mentioned the elements earlier, so you can go outside, it doesn't matter where you live, feel the air on your skin, feel the rain, feel the sun, feel the wind, all of that is nature too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's so interesting. At one point in this conversation, you mentioned, maybe this time of the year we are not going out barefoot, but I'm really now drawn to just popping out to my garden, because that is what we need to experience. If in the place where we live right now is cold, or too cold, or too hot, that is what we need to experience, because that's the part of the cycle. So we can't really hide away from being too hot.
No, and we have to kind of make ourselves uncomfortable a little bit, because, it's what happens in life. We get comfortable in our little areas, and when we get comfortable, we kind of stagnate. We don't grow, we don't change, we don't challenge ourselves. And so, if it's cold where you live, just stand outside, for half a minute, 30 seconds. You can soon pop your socks back on.
I think, we can invite our audience here. So wherever you are right now, just give yourself that 30 seconds or 1 minute and stand outside and take a big breath, and then enjoy, and then with all your senses, take everything what you're experiencing in that very, very moment. So, Emma, we've got a minute or two left. I want to acknowledge our producers, Dave's note here, who said that the book, he's saying that there is a book called Where to Park Your Broomstick by Lauren Malloy, M-A-L. Why? So thank you very much for the note here. So Emma, where can people find you, please? 60 seconds.
They can find me on Facebook, Emma Catherine Wild Witch, Twitter, Instagram, it's the same, Emma Catherine Wild Witch. You can check out my website, which is Emma Catherine Wild Witchcraft. I write for the House of Twigs, Gods and Radicals, and you can check out my new book on the Llewellyn website. It's available in the UK next month.
Beautiful. I tell you what, Emma, thanks very much for joining me here. I feel that, you will be back on my show here on the Aswa Radio Network. So thank you very much. Thank you. Enjoy the fire making outside. And then sending lots of love. And then for the rest of our audience, thank you very much for joining us here. This was our show, Zsuzsanna Medium. I was your host, Zsuzsanna Hörcsög, a medium from the UK. Thanks very much for being here. I'm always here on Tuesdays, 3:30 p.m. EST, 8:30 p.m. GMT, and 5:30 a.m. for the Australian friends. Thanks very much for being here. Sending you lots of love, many, many blessings, and see you next week. Thank you.